And finally, and this is the kicker,
All right, let's see it.
if the founding fathers were not Bible-believing church-saying Christians, why did they put Leviticus on the Liberty Bell? Leviticus 25:19, proclaim liberty throughout the land of which you are in.
So the founders didn't put anything on the Liberty Bell because the Liberty Bell already existed almost 20 years before the beginning of what we call the founding era, and the founders didn't talk about the Liberty Bell. It wasn't even referred to as the Liberty Bell at the time, but the Liberty Bell would not become an important symbol until around 1830 when it became a symbol of abolitionism. And the Liberty Bell was commissioned in 1751 by Isaac Norris, a Quaker who was asked to commission it to commemorate the 50th anniversary of William Penn's Pennsylvania Charter of Privileges, which was an Enlightenment document which asserted self-governance, religious tolerance, personal liberty. So if you actually look at Leviticus 25:10, not 25:19, but 25:10, you see it begins, and you shall hallow the 50th year. This is the Jubilee year. And you shall proclaim liberty throughout the land to all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. You shall return every one of you to your property, and every one of you to your family. So this was about commemorating the establishment of liberty, religious freedom, self-governance in the colony of Pennsylvania. And Isaac Norris, just like William Penn, was heavily influenced by Enlightenment ideals. And that brings up the question of liberty, because Kirk probably would have identified liberty with non-interference, at least on the parts of institutions that he didn't like. But that's not what liberty meant in the founding era. And I think Jonathan Gienap's recent book, Against Constitutional Originalism, has a very good discussion on this. In the Red Box, founding era constitutionalists, however, thought about liberty in a radically different way. To them, liberty was not synonymous with non-interference. It was not a measurement of whether or how much one had been coerced. Indeed, one could be heavily coerced and free, or conversely, lightly coerced and unfree. What mattered, what distinguished those who were free from those who were not, was whether one was subject to an alien will or a will of one's own. Liberty, therefore, could be realized only under a truly representative government, a government that embodied one's consent, and thus could be said to be acting in accordance with one's will. This, as well, is an outcome of Enlightenment rationalism and principles of self-governance and of liberty. And if you would like more on this notion of liberty, here are a bunch of sources that you can check out. So the Liberty Bell is not really about the founding. It predates the founding, and it is more deeply embedded in Enlightenment rationalism.
It is one of the most sinister, most unsubstantiated lies that does not come up against any sort of academic scrutiny. This idea that the founding fathers were a bunch of Enlightenment common law deists.
So this is wildly uninformed and misguided, and it's asserting a false dichotomy. But to begin, the overwhelming majority of scholars agree that the founding period was influenced by and was characterized overwhelmingly by Enlightenment rationalism and deist thought. But it wasn't a binary, and that's where Kirk misrepresents things. And Kirk was not a scholar and could not and did not engage competently with scholarship. But when you look at the scholarship, what you see is the recognition of more of a spectrum, where you had Enlightenment rationalism and Christianity mixing together. And when you looked at the founders, they were going to fall somewhere along the spectrum from more Enlightenment rationalism deist and less Christian to more Christian and less Enlightenment rationalist deist. And the most influential founders were on the more Enlightenment rationalist and deist side of the spectrum. But again, it was not a binary. You had the influence of the two. And this is why, when we look at the literature that is cited by the founders, the four most popular thinkers of the time were Montesquieu, Blackstone, Locke, and Hume. Those are all Enlightenment thinkers. And as we already saw, the person who commissioned the Liberty Bell to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Penn's Pennsylvania Charter of Privileges. These two men were both heavily influenced by Enlightenment rationalism as well. In fact, there's a case to be made that the founding is actually a reaction against, or at least the pendulum swinging the other way, against the First Great Awakening, which was characterized by a lot of emotionalism irrationalism, sectarianism, and anti-intellectualism. And that's precisely what the founders were pushing back against. And guess what Kirk advocated for? Sectarianism, anti-intellectualism, emotionalism. Now, he wants to pretend that it's not emotionalism, but he's appealing in his rhetoric, which is profoundly anti-intellectual, to the emotions of his audience. That's what made his message resonate with so many people, their feelings. The founders were pushing back precisely against that. That's why if you have a good understanding of religion in the American founding, you can see right through Kirk's lies, because the founding period was the period of least religiosity in the entire history of the colonies and the United States, coming as it did between the First Great Awakening and the Second Great Awakening, when religious activity dipped and Enlightenment rationalism peaked. So Kirk's notion that it is some kind of sinister lie that the founders were Enlightenment common law rationalists is profoundly misguided. But, as I have discussed in previous videos, Kirk also appealed to the falsehood that the founders were influenced by the Bible more than any other document, which, as I have shown, is just a misunderstanding of research that was published in the 80s by Donald Lutz. And you can check out this video for more information on that.
The reason they hate it is because the reason they must say this is that if we actually go back to our Christian roots and we go back to where we once were, it's America's best hope for revival and for a great future.
Well, if we went back to our actual roots, which were not Christian roots so much as they were Enlightenment rationalist roots, that would be a good chance for revival, because it would be a return to personal liberty and self-governance and representative government and civic virtue. And one of the things I think is interesting to study about the founding period is the founders who advocated for civic virtue and then went and fought in the war and came out the other side and said, there is not enough civic virtue among the population of the colonies. We need something that's going to keep people in check, because they don't have the discipline. They don't have the civic virtue to properly exercise all this liberty. What Kirk is doing is not engaging, much less representing, actual data or scholarly thought. Kirk is coming up with ways to make people feel good about their identity markers, and with ways to make people feel angry at those who disagree. The Christian roots that Kirk is talking about are not the roots of the founding. The roots of the founding are much different. They're certainly influenced by Christianity, but what he's talking about is actually precisely the kind of thing a lot of the founders were pushing back against. And the fit for this video has been the Avengers.